I've talked a lot about the foreword already in the presentations chapter, the motivations chapter, and in the chapter on the foreword. So what I want to do now is try and draw some advice from Laruelle as to how to proceed with our task of thinking today. So that's my synthesis of what we can learn from Laruelle's foreword, keeping in mind it's not just a foreword. I've already done several videos on the introduction. I keep referring to Tetralogues and to other references, and I refer to later passages in the book and the whole structure of the book. But keeping all that in mind, what can the foreword teach us or suggest to us in terms of proceeding with the task of thinking today? One thing to observe is that I think this foreword is very condensed. He's put already a dense synthesis of his thought at the beginning, and it deserves pondering for what it's actually saying and what it's capable of suggesting to us. As well, I would say that in the foreword we have in highly condensed form what one could say in a nutshell with the standard trope, what is living and what is dead in the philosophy of Laruelle as expressed in the foreword. But it has a more general import. So what is living and what is dead? We see the best of Laruelle, or some of the best, and what I would say is some of the worst, that is to say, some of what is potentially the most disappointing, to take one of the words from the end of the foreword. And the fact that I'm using a word from the end of the foreword raises the question of in what order should we read the foreword or think the foreword, in a certain sense, because Laruelle poses the question of order in the first paragraph, that we have to follow this rigorous unfolding, the rigorous order of the theorems, and that is totally correlated with the order of the experiences. So that's a provocative claim, and I think the foreword both confirms and disconfirms that thesis, because it's a thesis or a hypothesis. He can make all the prescriptions that he wants to make. That's just one hypothesis that we can put to the test. So there's no ex cathedra authority in a book that is revolting against authorities. So from my point of view, on a first approximation of reading, the foreword is sort of like an anti or reverse genealogy, and should be read in reverse order. That is to say, there are 3 paragraphs. The last paragraph is in sublimated form a description of Laruelle's motivations and experience in conceiving this new thought, which he will later call non-philosophy, but he hasn't come up with the concept or the name as yet. Maybe he has the concept, but he doesn't have the name. but we have to look and see, does he have the concept, and how will we know? Anyhow, we have the sort of messy, human all too human beginnings and motivations in the third paragraph. We have in the second paragraph the description of the thoughts that come up with those sort of motivations and the way of putting them in order. First, in the minority principle, which he calls a transitional book, there's it's already a rational reconstruction. It's already a putting in order, but it's the order of the context of discovery, if you will, where he tries to, or the context of carrying out the research, where he starts with philosophy and tries to transition by means of conceptual analysis, argument, appeal, maybe to transcendental experiences, to the new paradigm. And he describes discovering, because in fact it's discovering the need to start with the end of this transition from the old paradigm to the new paradigm, discovering the need to begin with the core of the new paradigm, to begin with the new paradigm and with the core, because a paradigm is a pretty big thing. You just can't just begin with a paradigm. It's chock full of all sorts of things. So we're beginning with the core of the new paradigm, and then working backwards or trickling down and creating all the other things that you need in the paradigm, and putting in perspective those things outside the paradigm that he's going to consider as part of the old paradigm. He doesn't envisage the case of things that are outside the new paradigm and outside the old paradigm. There could be other things, there could be other dimensions, but in this book he's not considering that possibility. There's 2,500 years of Greco-unitary thought, and that's essentially philosophical, although it has led to the avatars, the many avatars today that are instantiated in the human sciences. But at the root of it all, there's philosophy. So he doesn't really consider before the pre-Socratics. Is there something good there that we can learn from? He doesn't consider other civilizations, not just the Egyptians, the Chinese, the Japanese, but other parts of the world altogether, and the sort of thought that they had 2,500 years ago and before, or that they have now. So, in fact, despite the ambitiousness and the scope, the wide scope, the wide screen, if you want, that Laruelle is trying to implement, there is a limitation there. And that may be a problem, because if we take the foreword, and I'm looking forward a little to the introduction and to this analysis of 2,500 years of Greco-unitary thought. One of the methodological prescriptions or pieces of advice is think outside the box, in fact. Think as broadly as possible. So I'll try and get to that. I was in the second paragraph, and we've got basically the mixed attempt, because when you're breaking into a new paradigm, we're having your breakthrough, it takes time, and on the way, you're mixed up yourself. Things are coming in a not in a axiomatic, theorematic, deductive order. Things are coming up, you haven't tidied it all up, and even if you're very clear at a certain moment to talk to others, you're going to mix the paradigms to ease them into, or to punch them into, with provocative assertions, into your new way of thinking. And then, well, in the second paragraph, that's where he says that you have to, what I'm saying, take the leap, you have to take the leap or make the switch, the Gestalt switch, or make the change of paradigm into the core of the new paradigm, which is, here in this paragraph, he calls it the one, or individuals, or minorities, and he's also later going to call it the absolute, multiplicities, dispersions, the real. So we've got a whole set of synonyms or quasi-synonyms, because they each have different theoretical latencies associated with them. And you're meant to take as your point of departure the new, the core of the new paradigm, and then rearrange everything around. Even that as a process is going to be disorderly at the beginning, but he considers that in this book he's got to a point where the new core is imposing the paradigmatically correct order on the development of thought. And so for me, we've got sort of levels of messiness. There's the messy human or to human level. There's the that sets everything off. But this process may already be guided by what is at work within a new paradigm, after he's going to re-theorize maybe his whole process and his whole life. So, and say that was already operating there from the beginning, but he didn't know it. But we're not there yet. So we have this messy human set of motivations. And because Laruelle is a philosopher, many of those motivations are conceptual and not just affective. Then we have this messy conceptual transition phase. Then we have the leap. So that's already a little congealed or crystallized. It's no longer as sort of chaotic liquid as the human or to human phase. Then we have this messy conceptual transition phase. It's already congealed into concepts, and that's what we see in the minority principle. Then we have the further congealing or crystallization of the core of the new paradigm and its consequences, and that's what we see as the underpinning of this book, A Biography of Ordinary Man. And then in the first paragraph we have as close as we can get to full congealing or full crystallization. We've got rigorous science of man with a systematic foundation and a systematic order of thinking and of development and of experience. So everything is all systematic, congealed, crystallized form, if you believe Laruelle. That's what he thinks he's got to in this book. So that's his process. He's written the foreword in reverse order of that process because he thinks that the final result takes precedence in the interpretation of the process leading up to it. That's his idea, and that's a well-justified idea, a well-established procedure in the history even of the physical sciences. So it's quite plausible. If we say, which maybe we should, yes, that's interesting. I'm not a Laruellian. I'm never going to be a Laruellian or anything else. But I think Laruelle is pretty interesting. So what advice, what methodological advice can he give me in my own thinking? So basically there, you've got to read the foreword in both directions at once there, if you're looking for his advice. The idea is get to your ideas and then just develop them as extremely and radically and intensely as possible, and see where it goes. But that's already sort of advice for the goal and not for starting out. So you could say, well, how do I start out? Where do I get my ideas? And there we saw from the books he wrote in the 70s that the idea is if you want to think in the philosophical philosophizing sense of thinking, and you want to think further to get out of what you consider unsatisfying, disappointing ideas that are circulating today. His advice is, we saw synthesis of the most radical ideas. So you start with the most radical ideas that you can find. His most radical ideas were Deleuze and Derrida and Lyotard and Heidegger and Nietzsche. We are reading this book in 2021 or later, and Laruelle, in A Biography of Ordinary Man, we could consider that's already a basis, that's a radical set of ideas. And what I'm doing in this hyper book is I'm putting that in relation with what I consider, because this is an old book in a way, 36 years old for the moment, I'm putting it in relation with what I consider to be the most radical sets of ideas in philosophy or in philosophizing. Because none of these people are really, even Badiou, despite what he says, they're not really creating finished systems, or if they are, that's only part of what they're doing. So I'm taking the most radical thoughts in continental philosophy, in the Franco-Anglophone tradition of contemporary continental philosophy. So I'm taking Zizek's Sex and the Failed Absolute as his synthesis of his own work. I'm taking Immanence of Truths by Badiou, where he starts with the absolute, as Zizek does and as Laruelle advises us to do. So he should be happy. He should be applauding these people. Is he applauding them? I don't know. I haven't seen any applause from Laruelle. I haven't seen much applause from Laruelle about anything in philosophy aside from himself and his wife. So if we're looking at the advice aspect of Laruelle, it's think for yourself. Start with a synthesis of the most extreme, the most radical, the most intense thought, and then push it further. So at first that's going to be messy, because when you push things further, things start creaking, tearing, exploding. Push them further until you get to something new, and then make that new if it stands up to criticism and tests and thinking, make that new the core of your new thought. And then after working out all the associated questions, you can make that the basis for a systematic development. And system is good because it's a way of radicalizing your thought, because you push it to the extreme in itself and in the core, and then into all the corners and all the environment of your inside your paradigm. So systematizing can be a way of radicalizing. So that's his methodological advice, but he presents it in the reverse order, and that gives the impression that this heuristic evolution of your thought, or of his thought, is itself a human or two human detail, and that the core of his own method is jump to the peak, which is for him the one, the real, the absolute, man, multiplicities, minorities, dispersions, jump to the peak, and then revision everything else. Well, we know that's a very good method, but it's not the only method, and we've already shown that implicitly he's developed at least the idea of a different method from his initial path to that peak. And this is what happens in Tetralogues, which came out in 2019, so 34 years later. So he's had time to think about method, and Tetralogues takes the order of discovery process and as its method, and not the order of the leap and the rational reconstruction, the systematic order that Laruelle proposes. They're compatible, but they're different perspectives on the same thing. So in Tetralogues, you start with the world, you make it collapse into the earth, or that's what he said in the book just before Tetralogues. In English, it's maybe The Last Humanity. In French, it's In the Last Humanity, like in the last instance, but I don't think the English translation had the courage to put the in. You collapse the world. In Tetralogues, he assumes that you break away from the world by breaking away from the sciences of the world. The sciences of the world are all wrong. And you begin to make syntheses of philosophy with a new set of sciences and with other practices. And little by little, you go up to the cosmos and to a sort of, to the universe and to the cosmos, and a certain cosmic peak where everything is in a fecund, positive mixture, and things can be transformed, and then you come back as Messiah. Well, he uses the word Messiah. He's got a knack for choosing the wrong words. Let's say he's got a knack for choosing words that provoke us to thought. But I think there's something wrong with some of Laruelle's choice of words, and we'll see that maybe here in the foreword. So that's the process as described in Tetralogues. We can see that that's the process as described in the foreword. If we, contrary to Laruelle's prescription, we read the foreword, forward and backward, but starting with the backward. So in the wrong order. So sometimes reading things in the wrong order can give you useful advice or useful ideas or useful images. Anyhow, this is interesting because it gives the idea that maybe the peak, the core of the new paradigm as described in this book, is not the ultimate peak. And so this book is a biography of ordinary man, is itself a book of transition. He presents it as, first there was the transition, the human transition, then the conceptual transition, and now there's the system, the systematic order. So you can imagine we stop there and we just sort of refine the details and maybe sort of dig into the foundations to even better establish the core. But in fact, in the light of later developments, and not just later developments where he fills in and develops a little further the system, that will be philosophy 2 and maybe philosophy 3. But in fact, even in philosophy 3, what we've got is another paradigm change. And in philosophy 4, another paradigm change. And in philosophy 5, where I'll be taking the Tetralogues method from, another paradigm change. So, unless you say, like Heidegger, every great man, every great philosopher thinks only one thought, and unless you say the Laruelle, he doesn't change, they're just differences in the waves, they're just differences of emphasis, he doesn't change his ideas, that's philosophy. Unless you say that, which is ridiculous, you have to admit that this book is a book of transition as well, but it doesn't, the book is not just Laruelle, but the book itself is self-ignorant to a certain degree. And this idea of every great thinker has only one great thought to think, that's part of an immense propaganda attempt by Heidegger to rewrite his youth and his whole philosophical evolution in the light of this thesis that there's just one idea that he got when he was still young. I think he was still in high school, and that he's just gone deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into that idea. I think that's propaganda. It's there's something to it in some ways, but it's a sad idea of thought. And for somebody like Laruelle, who believes in dispersions, multiplicities, not just as content of thought, but as a method of thought, and who later goes on into the waves and undulations, that's an unbearable thought. And I don't think we should project that onto Laruelle's system. So if we accept this idea of going up and coming down, and if we accept the idea that's not once and for all, you don't just go up to the peak and come down to Messiah once and for all. You have to do it all the time. And the Messiah is not you, it's one point of the absolute within the empirical husk or shell of your empirical self. So let's not get uppity about all becoming messiahs or on the way or have already become messiahs. And it's just one point, a transcendental point, not a physical point, it's not an atom or anything. And it's multiple ascents and descents. Even though we're going to have to turn that round, the imaginary axis, we're not going to stick just to normal vertical axis, but still that's there in Tetralogues. So once we've got that, we can translate even the beginning into experiential terms, because people say, well, isn't it self-validating? It's one big tautology in a biography of ordinary man. He wants us to jump into the new language and the new paradigm and see all experience in terms of the new paradigm, and anything else is bad experience. It's empirical. It's infested with anthropological, Greco-unitary predicates and abstractions. So there's a sort of emptying out, peeling away of all these anthropological predicates to get to the one or the absolute. So that's one way of seeing it, and it's in danger of creating a vicious circle where the new experience confirms the new paradigm, which selects and produces and constitutes the new experience, and so on. But in fact, Laruelle's claim is, I think, that the new experience, insofar as it's a thinking experience as well, takes precedence over the concepts of the new paradigm. That's why he's able to change his ideas later on. That may not be why he's saying it now, but in fact, for him it's a purely theoretical point at this moment. Yes, to be sure, the new experience is not generated by the paradigm. It's generated by the one. It's generated by the real. It takes precedence over any concepts I might throw up. But in fact, for him, I've thrown up the right concepts. So in the third paragraph, he talks about a disappointed passion and an institutional disgrace, or in French we could translate it, it's indignité, so we could also translate it as indignity. And that's important because a disgrace or an indignity, an institutional disgrace, doesn't have to be what is empirically a bad thing. It's not being banned or demoted or kept in a sort of a dead end career-wise, or not gaining the recognition or whatever that you want. A disgrace could be a promotion. If surely people have this experience. You succeed in an exam, you succeed as a candidate, or you receive a promotion, and it's in a system such that even this good thing is tainted by the shame of being a man, as Deleuze says, the disgrace of the system. So it's not necessarily being in disgrace. Anyhow, so you're disappointed, yet you have a passion. And this passion is what drives you through the process of going through going through two, and then going through the most radical thoughts that you can find, creating your synthesis, pushing them further. All that's intellectual passion, conceptual passion, philosophical passion. Anyhow, with that, we look at the first sentence. This book attempts a systematic foundation for a discipline that has, needless to say, already been signalled and hinted at in history of thought, rigorous science of man, but one different from philosophy and the sciences of man. Okay, so what's going on there? You've got the good, the bad, and the ugly all in one sentence. The good is you have this passion and you're looking for a new paradigm. The bad, as far as I'm concerned, is you look for a new paradigm, and at the same time you look around for a name for this paradigm. In this book, Laruelle presents a very interesting new paradigm, and the name he finds when he looks around is science. So he rethinks what science means as a transcendental science and so on. But that's the name he comes across for his new paradigm. Later on, he'll find other names. But here we have this sort of peak, or in fact there are higher peaks, but this peak for him at the moment, that's the peak, the absolute, the one, and he calls it and the knowledge of it, because they coincide for him here, science. So I've already in many places argued that that's wrong, it's not really science, and even if you redefine science, that's the wrong name to use. But I'm willing to see over time, perhaps things will change in the future. And what science? It's a rigorous science of man. So that's another mistake already for me. He calls it man, and we can understand. He wants more humanity. He wants thinking to be more humane. And he finds that philosophy is sloppy, careless. That's the thing he wants to replace by being even more rigorous than the most rigorous philosophers that he could find. And he wants to be more humane, more concerned about the human. But Laruelle's idea of the human and of human experience is very strange and would be considered as totally inhuman by most people. So his methodological advice here is, you have to go through all these messy stages. Go for the peak, where you've pushed the most radical things even further, and free yourself of the anthropological predicates to do this. Free yourself of the empirical descriptions and predicates and data. So go for the pure case, and that's for me, that's a useful heuristic tip. It can't be an obligation. It can't be universally applicable. It can't be the one and only method. Other thinkers of a similar type to Laruelle, pluralist thinkers, taking the same sort of radical references as him, like Deleuze, for example, consider that it should go very concrete. But in fact, even that is only half of the truth, because one of the key concepts that is not widely commented or in any satisfactory way in 1,000 Plateaus is the abstract machine. So Deleuze is like Laruelle. They don't like abstractions. Abstractions are universals. They're anthropological predicates or whatever. But they like abstraction or abstract thought, or what Deleuze and Guattari call the abstract machine, as, amongst other things, a war machine against abstractions and universals. So, nonetheless, there is this opposite movement that you see in Zizek as well, not just the purity of the core, but as many examples, as many quotations as you can tolerably put in your book. That's good, because you're going to free up your thought from the limitations that it may have acquired, despite this leap into purity, by staying with itself. So at this point, Laruelle, he describes the book as a treatise of solitudes. So at this point, Laruelle is saying, go to the pure state, the pure concept, the pure core, and thinking. That's what he in fact means when he talks about science. What he should be saying, and what he thinks in fact, is not science but thinking. Thinking about man, but in fact thinking about the universe, the cosmos, and all that stuff as well, as Tetralogues will add. So it's thinking, noesis. And Laruelle's idea at this point is thinking is solitude. That's the idea as well of the individual, which is identical with minorities, by the way. Thinking is solitude. And that's something that you'll find over and over again in Deleuze. It goes back to Nietzsche, it goes back to Nietzsche's educator Schopenhauer. So thinking is solitude. And it's thanks to this solitude that you're able to move thought into a new paradigm. So that's it might seem evident, but it's not evident. Once again, Deleuze is very interesting on this point because, like Laruelle, in the third paragraph here, Deleuze says, flee discussions, flee idle talk. But he always takes care to add conversations are different to discussions. Conversations are like the exchange, the dialogue he had with Guattari and with Claire Parnay for the book Dialogues and with some others. So there is a freeing of the concepts from the superficial, neutralizing enclosures of philosophy, and so the solitude can sort of enlarge itself, can become sort of like a temporary bubble of solitude that includes people, other people, for a while. But the basic idea is the solitude, and you're in your own bubble of solitude, although it's a totally permeable bubble. And even so, we don't know the final word for Laruelle on this idea of conversations that Deleuze has as opposed to discussions. For the moment, we're getting the austere anchorite, go into the desert, go into the solitude, go into the one and the absolute, and that's where you'll find man, ordinary man, as transcendental point of leverage for the core of a new paradigm. So all that Laruelle could say, maybe he does say it here, all that is experiential through and through. The disappointment with what's around, the search for the most radical ideas and being still disappointed and having to push them further, the search for some sort of even newer idea, or an old idea looked at it a new way, to be the core of a new way of thought, and then seeing before your very eyes the world transformed by this discovery that you've made. So all that's experiential, and it can at a certain moment seem not exactly a sort of a mirror, infinity of mirror reflections back and forth, like a hall of mirrors between the concepts and the experience. It can seem like that and seem sort of so perfect and diamond, bright and clear, that it may seem like it will never change. But still, underlying it all, there is this idea that it's the experiences that generate all this, the experiences which are already impregnated with the new paradigm, if only we knew how to see it. And so it's empirical in a sense of transcendentally empirical, and could change. So we've got a crystallization in this book, but the advice is follow the experiences and melt everything up again and go even further if you can. But for the moment, that's as far as he can go.